Some criminals don't just escape prison, they escape straight from courtrooms, pulling off stunts so daring they seem ripped from a movie. From digging secret tunnels to slipping through tiny vents, these real-life escapes defied logic. Left guards baffled and captivated the world. Today, we're diving into the boldest courtroom breakouts that prove, when it comes to getting away, some will risk it all. The story begins in Moscow, where 18-year-old Leonid Greyser was on trial for a horrifying crime. He was accused of killing his sister in what was described as a ritualistic act. The courtroom was tense, filled with lawyers, judges, and spectators waiting for justice to be served. But Greyser had no plans to wait for a verdict. As the trial continued, Greyser sat quietly, but his eyes were scanning the small glass box that surrounded him. It was designed to keep defendants secure, but to him, it looked like something he could escape from. Then, without warning, he sprang into action. Greyser stood up and reached for the ceiling of his glass enclosure. He managed to remove the metal grill and began pulling himself up into the narrow space above. For a moment, the courtroom froze. Lawyers and judges stopped what they were doing, and spectators stared in shock. It was as if no one could believe what was happening right in front of them. As Greyser wiggled his way into the ceiling, chaos erupted. Court officers rushed toward the glass box. Some climbed in, while others tried to grab his legs. Greyser, desperate and determined, clung tightly to the beams above, refusing to come down. It was a bizarre scene, part courtroom drama, part action movie. The officers weren't giving up, and neither was Greyser. They pulled at his legs, trying to drag him back down, but he fought with all his strength. The struggle went on for several tense moments. Finally, one officer used a taser to subdue him. Greyser let out a cry and fell back into the box, where he was quickly restrained. The escape attempt was over, but the story didn't end there. News of the dramatic scene spread quickly, making headlines around the world.
This is 18-year-old Leonid Greyser, who's on trial in Moscow, Russia, for the murder of his sister, Aradia Koral.
People couldn't stop talking about how this teenager had tried to escape through the ceiling of a courtroom, in full view of everyone. Though Greyser didn't succeed, his daring move became a symbol of desperation. His trial continued as planned, and the footage of his escape attempt remains one of the most shocking moments in courtroom history. Greyser's attempt didn't win him freedom, but it left everyone in that room and those watching later completely stunned. Sometimes, real-life events are stranger than any story we could make up. In the world of daring criminals, few names stand out like Pascal Payet. Known for his audacious helicopter prison escapes, Payet had become a legend in France. But his courtroom escape in 2001 cemented his reputation as a master of evasion. It started like any other day in court. Payet was being tried for armed robbery and his role in an infamous prison breakout. The courtroom was filled with tension. Payet had already proven he was willing to do whatever it took to avoid confinement. Yet, no one expected what was about to happen. As the trial dragged on, Payet remained calm. To the untrained eye, he appeared resigned to his fate. But beneath the surface, Payet was counting down the minutes. He knew help was coming, and the plan had been set in motion. Suddenly, a loud whirring sound filled the air. The courtroom fell silent, everyone exchanging confused glances. The sound grew louder, more insistent, until it was unmistakable. A helicopter. Heads turned to the tall courtroom windows as shadows flickered across the walls. Before anyone could react, chaos erupted. A helicopter hovered just above the courthouse roof. Payet's associates, heavily armed and masked, had commandeered the aircraft. As everyone else in the room stared in disbelief, Payet seized his moment. He leapt to his feet and yanked at the handcuffs that bound him to the chair. His movements were swift, almost rehearsed, as if this had been part of his plan all along. Two masked men came down from the helicopter, smashing through a window near the courtroom's side exit. They moved with military precision, tossing a rope toward Payet, who didn't hesitate. The courtroom guards were stunned, momentarily frozen by the audacity of the plan. Payet clung to the rope as the helicopter began to rise, glass crunching underfoot as guards tried to stop him, and someone lunged for the rope, but it was too late. Payet was already halfway up, the wind from the helicopter's rotor scattering papers and debris across the courtroom. The helicopter soared into the sky, taking Payet with it. By the time anyone could radio for help, he was gone. The courtroom erupted into chaos, a mix of shock, disbelief, and frustration. Payet's escape became the stuff of legend. Authorities would later describe it as the most daring courtroom escape in French history. Though he was eventually recaptured, his escape continues to be a symbol of how far someone will go for freedom. A reminder that, in the game of cat and mouse, sometimes the mouse wins. Our next story takes us to South Korea, where a man named Choi Gap-bok shocked the world with a courtroom escape that seems straight out of a magician's playbook. Choi wasn't just any detainee. He was a yoga expert, a man whose incredible flexibility would soon make headlines. Choi had been arrested on robbery charges and was being held in a detention cell just outside the courtroom. The cell was small, secure, and designed to keep even the most determined criminals inside. But Choi had other plans. He had spent years practicing yoga, mastering his body's movements, and developing a flexibility most people could only dream of. On this day, all that training was about to pay off. The key to Choi's plan? A tiny food slot in the cell door. It was meant for passing meals to detainees, definitely not for human use. But Choi wasn't like most people. As soon as the guards turned their backs, he sprang into action. First, he stripped down to his underwear, knowing every inch of space would matter. Then, with remarkable speed, he began to squeeze his body through the food slot. His head went first, tilting and twisting in ways that seemed impossible. Inch by inch, he wiggled through the narrow opening. For most people, such a feat would be unthinkable. But for Choi, it was a test of patience and precision. He moved like water, flowing through the impossible space. By the time his shoulders passed through, it was clear he was actually going to make it. The entire process took just 34 seconds. 34 seconds of determination, precision, and skill. By the time the guards noticed something was wrong, Choi was already out. He slipped past the courtroom unnoticed, vanishing before anyone could stop him. When the guards discovered the empty cell, they couldn't believe their eyes. How could a grown man fit through such a tiny opening? It seemed like something out of a movie. The news of Choi's escape spread quickly, leaving both the public and authorities stunned. Choi's freedom didn't last long. He was recaptured 6 days later, hiding out in a nearby town. But his escape became the stuff of legend. People couldn't stop talking about the man who turned a food slot into a doorway to freedom.
He was there, then he was gone. We have new video that shows how a notorious Mexican drug lord escaped prison through a sophisticated tunnel. Omar Villafranca is following this.
Our journey takes us to Mexico, where Joaquin El Chapo Guzman pulled off one of the most audacious courtroom-linked escapes in modern history. A man known as much for his cunning as for his drug empire. Guzman's ability to outwit the law was legendary. At the center of this daring escape was a mile-long tunnel that his associates had meticulously dug, leading directly to the shower area of his cell. Guzman was on trial, so his movements were closely monitored. But he had an ace up his sleeve, impeccable timing, and an unparalleled network of loyal followers. The tunnel was no ordinary escape route. It was a marvel of criminal ingenuity, ventilated, reinforced, and equipped with lighting. The piece de resistance.
Guzman still faces more than 24 counts in 7 U.S. federal courts. But Scott, it's worth noting, the last time Guzman escaped from prison, he was on the run for 13 years.
A modified motorcycle mounted on tracks, designed to whisk Guzman away at high speed. As proceedings unfolded in the courtroom, Guzman slipped into the shower area under the guise of a routine break. Within moments, he descended into the tunnel and disappeared. By the time guards realized something was amiss, Guzman was miles away, having resurfaced in a remote field. His freedom didn't last forever. He was recaptured months later, but this escape cemented Guzman's reputation as a master of evasion, leaving a courtroom full of stunned officials and a legacy of escape artistry that remains unrivaled. Our final story takes us to the United States, where Frank Abagnale Jr. orchestrated a courtroom escape so audacious.
Frank Abagnale Jr. was born in the Bronx, New York, on April 27, 1948. He spent many of his early years in Bronxville, New York.
That it could have been pulled from a Hollywood script. Of course, that's no surprise. Abagnale's life would later inspire the blockbuster film Catch Me If You Can. But before he was a movie legend, he was a real-life con artist who fooled everyone, even in the courtroom. Abagnale had already made headlines as a master of deception. By the time he was 21, he had posed as a Pan Am pilot, a doctor, a lawyer, defrauding banks out of millions of dollars in forged checks. He had finally been caught and was awaiting trial, but as you might expect, Abagnale wasn't about to stick around to face the music. In typical Abagnale fashion, his escape didn't rely on brute force or physical skill. It was all about his ability to manipulate people. He had noticed that court guards often treated undercover government agents with special privileges. So, he devised a plan that was as simple as it was brilliant. He would convince the guards that he was one of them. Abagnale claimed to be an undercover prison inspector sent to evaluate the facility where he was being held. He carried himself with such confidence that the guards didn't think to question him. Why would they? He spoke with authority, dressed sharply, and even made casual comments about the inefficiencies he had observed during his time in custody. Little by little, Abagnale gained their trust. He used their belief in his authority to secure small favors, unlocked restraints, access to areas normally off limits. The guards, eager to accommodate what they thought was a high-ranking inspector, gave him exactly what he needed. Then, one day during a court appearance, Abagnale made his move. He simply walked out. Dressed impeccably and carrying himself like he belonged, he strolled right past security. No one stopped him. No one questioned him. And before anyone realized what had happened, he was gone. For weeks, authorities scrambled to locate him. His escape was the talk of law enforcement and the media, with many baffled by how he had pulled it off. Eventually, Abagnale was recaptured, but by then, his courtroom escape had solidified his reputation as a criminal mastermind. Abagnale's story is more than just a tale of crime. It's a testament to the power of confidence and cunning. While his escape didn't last forever, it remained one of the most legendary courtroom breakouts in history, proving that sometimes the sharpest tool isn't force, but wit. These courtroom escapes remind us that truth really is stranger than fiction. From daring tunnels to outsmarting guards, these stories continue to amaze and baffle us. Which escape shocked you the most? Or do you know of another outrageous getaway we missed? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories from around the world.